Welcome to College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by AT&T.
There will be one more set of rankings after this one. That will be final. Is there any work that will emerge from the committee in Grapevine, Texas that could really change? We'll show you the latest version of the rankings and then apply it to this empty bracket, which will be filled for good on Sunday afternoon.
Numbers are everywhere, all around us, leading us. More than digits in a sequence, they're symbols of success.
What's my definition of success? Listening to what your heart says.
Take what belongs to you.
Michigan stunned the college football world.
Here, a new landscape awaits, a new path to victory. This is where the line will end and the final test begins for sole possession of the number one.
Frazier straight ahead and straight in. A stunner at Syracuse should secure Texas's spot.
So many numbers in the world, so many teams vying for this prize.
You'll never recall. I know I can change. We are not enough. We are not the same.
But who's counting? We are.
We get to use the word penultimate. We look forward to that every year. One more ranking after this one. Glad to have you with us. College Football Playoff Top 25. Reese Davis, Booger McFarland, Joey Galloway, Greg McElroy. Abbreviated show tonight, taking you to the SEC ACC Challenge. Tennessee and Syracuse, both of whom might see their football teams ranked in the latest edition. So let's get right to it. Only a half hour to get it done. So let's look at number 25 as we give you the college football playoff rankings brought to you by AT&T. Memphis, after knocking Tulane perhaps out of contention for a playoff spot, gets into the field, probably the quietest 10-win team in America. At 24, Army will play for the American title at home against Tulane this weekend. They are back into the rankings at 24. Deion Sanders' Colorado Buffaloes at 23. Finished in a tie for first place. Did not win the tiebreaker. Will not play in the Big 12 championship game. Syracuse, after knocking Miami out of the ACC championship game, now giving the ACC another ranked team, which perhaps could be helpful to that conference as they try to get multiple bids. Brett Bielema's Illinois team, another quiet 9-win squad. They're at number 21. They have losses to number 1 Oregon and Penn State. We assume Oregon's going to be number 1 again. They're the only undefeated team in the country. Number 20, UNLV is going to play for a spot in the playoff against Boise State in the Mountain West Championship game. Barry Odom's team has won 10. They are up 2 spots to number 20. 19, Missouri Tigers could be important for resume builders for all of those 3-loss SEC teams, one of whom is Missouri, but because of the strength of schedule and the losses that they had, the particular losses, not really viewed to be in that 3-loss mix. BYU started off hot, lost a couple, finished with a win, did not make it to the Big 12 championship game. But what a season they had. They're at number 18 and up a single spot. Clemson, after losing to South Carolina, drops 5 spots, but Clemson simply win, and if they win the ACC championship game against SMU, they'll go to the playoffs.
No doubt. That's a great thing if you're Dabo Swinney, and Tyler from Spartanburg will be happy. Win, and we are in. Really simple.
It's the fabulous party, a consolation prize, as it were, for Tyler from Spartanburg. Dabo said people would be mad if they made it. No, they won't. They'll say, hey, good job, Dabo. Number 16, Iowa State. Iowa State's playing for the Big 12 title. Like Clemson, winning in. No real shot at an at-large berth for Matt Campbell's Cyclones, so they'll have an opportunity against Arizona State. At number 15, there is Arizona State. So 15 versus 16, that tells you almost certainly it's going to be one team from the Big 12. Whoever wins it's in, no one else goes from that conference.
Also, seeing UNLV where they were, assuming Boise beats UNLV in the Mountain West title game in Boise, Idaho, their backyard on the blue turf, likely that Boise's looking at a first-round bye with the Big 12 champion starting as at least 15 or 16. So something of note there.
That would put them, and if they don't get into the top 12, put them at number 12. Now, here's that cluster of 3-loss SEC teams. We'll be looking for Miami, too. South Carolina has been hot with Lenore Sellers. They won late against Clemson, and there they are at number 14.
Yeah, nobody more hot than South Carolina at this time of year. It's unfortunate they lost games early on, but they've now won 6 in a row. Texas A&M in that cluster, Missouri, Clemson, on those 6 wins they have, but they're sitting at 14, and that's probably not going to get it done.
So South Carolina's problem is head-to-head, most notably against Ole Miss. Ole Miss is 9-3. They beat South Carolina senseless in South Carolina's house, but both teams are sitting there at 9-3.
And while Ole Miss has an outstanding win against both Georgia and South Carolina, their strength of schedule is 31. So by some of the teams in front of them's comparison, not quite as strong, knowing that they lost to some teams that aren't in the top 25, like Kentucky and LSU. And obviously, that third loss against Florida is a tough one for them to stomach.
So now this is where we're at the spot of where the last team in and first team out. And at the moment, after Miami lost at Syracuse, no real great wins for the Canes this year, and the Canes dropped 6 spots.
I think Miami losing 2 of their last 3 really hurt them, Georgia Tech and Syracuse. And we were really waiting to see where Miami was compared to Alabama. So we talked about the last team in. We just needed to see. Now Alabama's ahead of Miami, so Alabama looks like they'll be the last team has a chance to get in.
And it's massive, too, because Miami there at 10-2. Obviously, they have not been, so far, the committee has acknowledged win-loss record. But Miami now, their best win against Duke and Louisville, neither team in the top 25. So it's really tough for Miami after their second loss in 3 weeks that they fall behind, likely Alabama at 11.
One thing all of these teams have proven is we look at number 11. Number 11 is Alabama, as we expected. Now, all of these teams have proven they can lose. They've proven they can lose to mediocre teams. There are disqualifying factors for all of them. So the question becomes, what did you do well enough to put you at the top of this stack?
And right now they have a 3-loss Alabama above a 2-loss Miami. And this is something that Ward Manuel has told us. It's not necessarily going to be the team that has the least amount of losses. We're going to look at these teams and see who we think are the better teams. And that's a clear statement based on that ranking.
So this would put, as I look at it, as we decipher it, because we're seeing these rankings when you do, that would make Alabama the last team in the field at the moment. At the moment. Now, this might be important, too. Boise State is number 10. They're in a win-and-end situation. If they lose, they are unlikely to make it. But the reason it's important here for a couple of reasons. One, because of the bye you mentioned. And also because there's another buffer ranking line. We haven't seen SMU yet. So should Clemson beat SMU, one would think that SMU would still be in pretty good shape to hold that last at-large spot, depending on how the game goes. Who's number 9? Indiana. So now we have another line before we see the Ponies. And Kurt Cignetti's team, strength of schedule was debated. They really had one huge game, lost it against Ohio State. You see the schedule settling at 65, but they did the thing that good teams do. They hammered almost every other mediocre team they played.
And we talked a lot about the strength of schedules, 103, 104, 105. It wound up being 65th, which is not great, but it's somewhere in the middle, and I think that's more salvageable for them.
It's almost dead in the middle.
Right,
Out of 134, it's almost right in the middle of the pack. 8. There's SMU. SMU has only one loss early in the season on the road against BYU. And the Mustangs will play Clemson for the ACC championship. Win, obviously they're in and looking at a bye, and lose. And I would think with a couple of buffer teams between them that they would get the last at-large bid or one of the last at-large bids.
I think they're in a really good spot. The only thing is you look at who they've now beaten. Duke, Louisville, same suspects as Miami. In Miami, it's being held against them in the second loss situation. Would it be held against SMU? Currently not a single win against a team that is currently ranked in the top 25 for the Ponies. But if they win this week against Clemson, that would obviously punch their ticket, no doubt about it.
It's a fair point, and so it's probably really important how SMU plays on Saturday, too. At number 7, Tennessee slides up a spot. We'll look at the bracket momentarily as these teams are right on the cut line of getting home games.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. We have not seen Ohio State yet. And I think that's another comparison we're looking for, Tennessee and Ohio State, because they may be matched up against one another, and this will decide who gets the home game. And this is huge. It's cold in Columbus, Ohio.
It's cold in Knoxville.
That snow we had on the way in here, Ohio State needs to play Tennessee at home if they have a chance to beat them.
Have you been to the mountains this time of year?
I'm not exactly in the mountains, Reese, but I've been in the area.
It's not, it's not Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida down here. You know something? Ohio State's at number 6. They dropped 4 spots.
It's still 2 wins against teams that are 11-1. I mean, you beat Indiana, who's sitting at 9, and they beat a team that's in front of them Penn State. So I think Ohio State, while last week is a killer, still appropriately ranked at 6.
Let's look at number 5. At number 5, the Georgia Bulldogs will have a couple of top 5 matchups in conference championship games. Georgia and Texas playing for the SEC crown. At number 4, the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Now remember, this is where we have to remember the bracketing rules. Notre Dame, no conference, as you know. The highest they can be seeded is 5. That's a high, so they can't get a first-round bye. The best scenario for the Fighting Irish is that they would be seeded 5th.
I think if I were Notre Dame, I'd feel really good. We're in, and 99% of the time, they're going to host a first-round game at their spot. So Notre Dame should feel really, really good right now.
20th, 21st, somebody's playing in South Bend.
In South Bend.
It's gonna be
and it's going to be cold.
Now there it's cold. Now there it's cold. Now that's cold. It's a different level, Joey. At number 3, Penn State. Penn State in the Big Ten championship game, benefiting from Ohio State's stumble against Michigan. At number 2, we presume will be the Texas Longhorns. It is Texas and Georgia in the SEC, and Oregon and Penn State playing for the Big Ten championship. So now you've seen the top 25. So now let's go through and show you how these teams will be placed in the bracket. Remember, to be in the quarterfinals, you have to win your conference championship game. So how we're doing it is the highest ranked teams from a conference at the moment. That would give Oregon, Texas, SMU, and Boise State first round byes. Arizona State, the highest of the outside the top 12, but the 5th highest ranked champion. They get in automatically. They would play at Penn State. Ohio State would have a home game. Notre Dame and Georgia, under the current scenario, would play a home game. And look at that potential for a 3rd Georgia-Texas matchup if that were to be unveiled like this. Indiana at Georgia. Alabama and Notre Dame, the first year of the expanded playoff. Tennessee at Ohio State, and Arizona State at Penn State. The controversy, the question will be for the last team in at the moment. It may not be a point at the end, but what do you think about what the committee has said up to this point?
Well, a couple of things that jumped out. Number 1, if I were SMU, I'd feel really good. Regardless of what happens in the title game, I think we're going to feel really good. As far as Alabama over Miami, I think that's going to be a slippery slope as these playoffs continue to develop, because you have a team in one of the Power 4 conferences that has the least amount of losses when it comes to these two teams. Miami is 10-2, Alabama is 9-3. And so to put Alabama in over Miami right now, I think that's one of those things, man, we better be careful as far as that's concerned when these schedules are unbalanced.
We don't have to be careful at all. When you look at the teams that Alabama beat, and you look at the way Miami finished with the 2 out of 3 to unranked teams, then it opens that door. And once you open the door to be judged on the eye test, after that, that's your business. And I've said this to Reese before. All these teams we're talking about, Ole Miss, Alabama, South Carolina, now Miami. When you open the door and lose to unranked teams, now whatever the committee says, I'm okay with. They lost to Alabama lost to Oklahoma. That's why they're in this discussion, because they wouldn't be in it if they did not.
Let me ask you, Greg, about football judgment. That's what I like to use instead of the eye test. Football judgment for Alabama, that Oklahoma performance was abysmal.
Brutal.
It was terrible.
Brutal.
But at the same time, you can also look at Miami and say they benefited from 2 really controversial replay overturns against Virginia Tech and Cal that let them win those games. How far down the well is appropriate when making football judgments about either one horrible performance or a couple of calls that bounced your way?
I think oftentimes that last spot is often about football judgment. My question, though, about this committee is what's now changed, because it feels like in the first 3 or 4 editions of the rankings that they've given us, it's been very much, strength of schedule is important, but it's not as important as the win-loss record. That's been elevated slightly. Based on prior years, that wasn't always important. Strength of schedule was the number one factor, and it wasn't up until this week. And now I think they're finally recognizing that while Miami is explosive offensively, they have massive flaws defensively. And I think when you look, and that's the tough thing about the 12-team playoff, the teams that are vying for that last spot are all flawed.
Yes.
It's just who's less flawed.
I don't think they didn't see it, though. I think they see it, but they don't punish you until you lose. So they see these flaws, and as long as you find ways to win those games, the ones you're talking about, they won. So, okay, we can let that go by. When you lose, now we're going to punish you.
Well, it shouldn't be that way then.
Why?
But let's go over to Heather Dennett. She does an unbelievable job covering this for us right now. And Heather, when you and I were talking before the show, I sort of landed on the term with all of these teams, least objectionable. All of them are objectionable to some way to getting in the playoff, but the least objectionable, they say, at the moment, to Alabama. What's your reaction to what you've seen?
Well, I want to take a minute to remind people that these first-round buys can change. And I also want to point out down at the bottom, okay, so we have 11 Alabama and 12 Miami. And we keep talking about the 12th team getting left out for that 5th highest ranked conference champion, which is absolutely correct, Arizona State. But if you have multiple conference champions ranked outside the committee's top 12, and you see down lower in the rankings where you have Clemson, you have Iowa State, you have Arizona State, you have UNLV. If you have 2 of those that still need to get into this bracket on selection day, guess who's out? Not just Miami, Alabama, too. So you can have the 11th and 12th team bumped out for the 4th and 5th highest ranked conference champions. That's important to remember. The other question I have here is I'm wondering how much movement these conference championship games can make down below. Can anything else happen to help some of these bubble teams? Because you are going to have some teams that can claim a win against conference champions. So I think that's another big question.
And the other one, too, I'm going to keep pounding this drum, just seed the field. Enough with this conference champions in the buys. Look at Penn State. I mean, Arizona State's a good team. Boise State's a good team. You want that to get to the semifinals, or if you're Oregon, the number 1 team, right there, Tennessee or Ohio State? I mean, that's a major flaw in this thing that needs to be corrected immediately, not for this year, but for next year. AT&T is keeping you connected with our bracket insights. Time to sign up for ESPN's first CFP Bracket Challenge. Play for a chance to win $50 grand with your family or friends. Don't forget to sign up ESPN.com/CFP Challenge for the first ever CFP Bracket game. You guys do the brackets for the basketball tournament?
Always, no question.
All right. That's what the bracket will look like. Ward Emanuel will answer some questions about how the committee arrived at these conclusions.
College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by AT&T. Connecting changes everything. And in part by Mercedes-Benz.
It's V-Week on ESPN as we continue Jim Valvano's fight against cancer.
Capital One rewarding performance, the Big Ten with 4 teams in the current field, and with Alabama getting the last team in at the moment. SEC also with 4. You see the 3 one-bid leagues, and Notre Dame is ranked 4th. Of course, the highest they can be seeded is 5th. Joining us now is the chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, Ward Manuel. So, Ward, let's start with the last team in the cluster of SEC teams in Miami. What gave Alabama the edge over the rest of that group?
Well, Reese, it's good to be with you again. What it came down to is as we evaluated both teams and looked at how they ranked, obviously we think highly of both teams. One's at 11, one's at 12. But what it really came down to is Alabama is 3-1 against current top 25 teams, and Miami is 0-1. Alabama is 6-1 against teams above 500, and Miami's 4-2. Both have had some losses that weren't what they wanted out of those games. But in the last 3 games, Miami has lost twice. And so for us, in evaluating their body of work, we felt that Alabama got the edge over Miami.
Well, the body of work is complete for Alabama, for Miami, for Ole Miss, for South Carolina. There's one more rankings to do. What could change? Could it change? Is it set?
Yes, it could change. It all depends on the outcome of these games. The commissioners have asked us to rank the top 25 through the conference championships, and that's what we intend to do.
Okay.
We have high regard, as I've said before, for those who are playing in those conference championships, and we will closely evaluate those games and the outcome of those games to rank the top 25 on Sunday.
Okay, among that cluster of teams, though, and I'm not talking about all of them or not talking about UNLV or Clemson knocking someone out. Among that cluster of teams, what could happen and why could anything happen to change the order?
Well, it just depends on those who are playing in their conference championships.
But none
how
of those
the
teams are
outcome of
playing
those
in the
games
conference
reads.
championships. You know what? You see what I'm saying? None of those teams we're talking about are playing.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes. So those who are not playing, we will not adjust those teams because they don't have another data point, obviously. But in terms of those who are playing, how they'll move, if they'll move at all. If you remember 2 years ago, TCU lost in their conference championship game and didn't move. They stayed at 3. So we could do that, or we could adjust depending on the outcomes of the game.
Okay, so I want to make sure, and I want to give you a chance to clarify to make sure that we're on the same page here. So absent one of the lower-ranked teams, Clemson, UNLV, stealing a bid, as it were, then nothing would change that would move Miami, Ole Miss, South Carolina in a different order or ahead of Alabama.
Any team that is not playing right now, we don't have a data point to rearrange where we have those teams ranked. And so that is set in terms of how we see them going into the final week of championship week. There's nothing that's going to change, Reese, for us to evaluate them any differently than we have now. Those teams who are not playing cannot be adjusted in terms of where they are compared to other teams that are not playing. But the championship teams, we will evaluate that data point to determine if there needs to be any movement based on how the performance of the game goes.
Okay, that'll bring some drama on Saturday for sure. Ward, always a pleasure. Look forward to talking with you on Sunday after the rankings are official and complete. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Reese. Good to be with you.
As Ward Manuel, chair of the College Football Playoff Selection Committee and also the athletic director at Michigan. Just over 4 minutes. SEC, ACC Challenge, Syracuse and Tennessee. There's Chaz Lanier for the Big Orange against the Orange. He'll tip off at 7:30 Eastern Time.
You're watching College Football Playoff Top 25, presented by AT&T. College Football Playoff Top 25 is presented by AT&T. Connecting changes everything.
Today's road test presented by Goodyear Boog. Which one? What's the biggest one? We know the biggest one, right?
Oh, no doubt about it, baby. Without a doubt. Clemson and SMU, baby.
The last one of the night.
We're looking up now the board trying to find it. Who couldn't find it?
It really is. You think about it. If SMU wins, they're in. Obviously, Clemson's out. Bama's in. If SMU wins, Clemson wins, Bama might be out. That's probably the most intriguing one.
Yeah, I think so, too. And then you also look at how the game's played. Normal game, SMU's fine.
Yeah.
Clemson were to do what they haven't done all year and hammer them.
Yeah.
Maybe
Make it
we
a house.
do have some drama. Who knows? Here comes basketball.